What's up, everyone? It's Jack here with another episode of Survivorflux. Instead of going over every little detail of this 2-hour episode, we're going to be looking at where everyone stands as of the end of this episode, what strategic moves actually got them or led them to where they're going to be going into episode 2, and where everyone stands within alliances. First, let's quickly talk about fire tokens. As far as my opinion on fire tokens, I'm excited to see it play out. It almost seems like Edge of Extinction makes fire tokens more interesting. It's weird to think about what a fire token season would be like without the Edge of Extinction element, but we'll just have to wait for future seasons to find out. I'm keeping an open mind. It's definitely been mildly interesting so far. So let's look at where everyone stands with fire tokens. There are 16 people in the game with one fire token, including Natalie, who got her fire token from Sandra in exchange for an immunity idol that's good for 3 tribal councils, now 2 after this episode. Sandra and Amber have 0 fire tokens, and Jeremy and Boston Rob have 2 fire tokens. Amber bequeathed hers to Boston Rob. That one looked very obvious. And then Jeremy was bequeathed Natalie's fire token, which put her at 0 before she traded for Sandra's. So, Sandra and Amber, 0 fire tokens. 16 players, 1 fire token. Jeremy and Boston Rob, 2 fire tokens. I'm also interested to see when someone gets voted out that doesn't have such an obvious direct ally, such as Boston Rob and Amber and Jeremy and Natalie, exactly who they choose to give theirs to, because you do have to give it to someone, but someone like a Wendell, who exactly would he decide to give his fire token to? Now that that's out of the way, obviously Amber and Natalie have been voted out. Natalie first, Amber second. So first, we're mostly going to be talking about the Blue Tribe and what elements led to Natalie getting voted out and onto the Edge of Extinction. And then we'll be mostly looking at the strategy from the Red Tribe. I know that they jumped back and forth throughout what could be called episode 1 and episode 2, but we're going to separate it into 2 parts, where everyone stands in the Blue Tribe and where everyone stands in the Red Tribe. So both tribes are obviously down to 9 people now. I always no matter who I'm rooting for, I'm always happy when the numbers are evened out. I hate when there are seasons where one tribe just keeps going to tribal council. This really allowed us to see the dynamics on both tribes play out within that first episode. But on the Blue Tribe, the main scenes and takeaways are, first of all, old school versus new school. We saw Boston Rob and Parvati align, which was somewhat shocking based on how they interacted in Heroes versus Villains, but it's also not shocking that they would align together. They've definitely interacted quite a bit outside of the game, and I think it was a smart move for 2 of the people that should have been the biggest targets pairing up and trying to work together. And then we have to talk about the scene with Ben and Boston Rob, where we see a small conversation between 4 people where Danny's kind of suggesting that Boston Rob needs to go first. And then Ben reveals when he's walking on the beach with Boston Rob and Jeremy that names are getting thrown out. From there, Boston Rob's like, whose names are getting thrown out? And Ben's like, well, I've heard your name. Of course, Boston Rob says, who said my name? It's so amazing how Boston Rob gets Ben to bequeath this information to him. Everyone's making fun of Ben, but Ben admits in a confessional that he was starstruck. And I do understand that to a certain extent. It definitely put a bad light on all of these newer players versus old players who were really established kings and queens of the game. Boston Rob, based on the edit, pretty quickly gets Ben to admit it was Danny. And was that a bad move for Ben? Not telling him, but maybe bringing it up in the first place in the way that he did. But once Boston Rob was on his case about it, I feel that Ben had no other choice, or Boston Rob would have rallied the troops against Ben. So Ben spills it, and instead of deciding to go for Danny, Boston Rob actually goes directly to Danny. It's a conversation with Ethan, Parvati, Danny, and Boston Rob Rob confronts her directly. And we don't see anything where Boston Rob says Ben said this. So that doesn't necessarily ruin the relationship that could form between Danny and Ben, even though Danny does know that from what we saw, she only said it to 3 different people, but that wasn't really focused on her wanting to know who had told Boston Rob that she had told them that she was thinking about voting him out. But Boston Rob, in what I think was a really good show of strategy, went right to her, asked her about it, and then Danny in turn was completely honest about it and told Boston Rob that, yeah, I did say that. And then Boston Rob essentially, I guess, forgives her and says that he wants to work together. And from there, we see an old school alliance forming. Ethan, Parvati, Danny, and Boston Rob. Now, who are the other outliers? we have to talk about Denise and Adam. Denise and Adam, quote unquote, get lost in the woods, but, Survivor 101, first day, you don't go off by yourselves for a long period of time. And so they do talk strategy. You can't blame them. You would expect that. But apparently they were gone too long and everyone was wondering exactly where they are, counting the heads of the people that were there and just clearly pointing out to each other these two are missing. And so we do see that Adam and Denise form somewhat of an alliance. How long that'll last, based on the fact that they were called out for being gone so long, we'll have to see. But Adam, in what's kind of a cute moment, kind of a cringy moment, says that he wants to be Denise's next Malcolm. I can see that working well for both of them. Denise kind of taking on that, what they call the mama hen or mother hen role, where you have a younger, usually guy, team up with one of the older women, and in this case, the oldest woman on the cast. And so they come back, and Ben reveals to Adam that people are throwing his name out. And to me, that seems like Ben and Adam, and I believe that I've read they have a previous relationship. It would make sense since they were in seasons 33 and 35 that they would have gone to some events together. And Adam honestly plays this really well. And he immediately tries to throw the target off of them and says, why are you targeting a pair that just met over an obvious pair in Natalie and Jeremy, who not only played together in a previous season, season 29, San Juan del Sur, but they were in an alliance together, and Natalie fought for Jeremy. And so we don't get a lot from Jeremy and Natalie before Tribal Council. It essentially comes down to, at least as the audience, believing that it's going to be one between Denise, Adam, Jeremy, or Natalie. And the only other person that we haven't talked about on this 10-person tribe is Michelle, and we do see at Tribal Council, other than Jeremy and Natalie, she was the only one left completely out of the vote. And so even though we don't, at the end of the episode, get a reveal of who exactly every person voted for, we do know that 3 votes were cast one way, and then 7 votes, most likely, were cast towards Natalie. And we see throughout the Tribal Council that Jeremy starts to realize this. And so Natalie winds up exiting the game. And to me, I think this makes sense. A lot of people are saying it's really dumb for you to vote out one of your strongest players. If they do want to split up that duo, to me, it in a way makes more sense to vote out Natalie. I could see Rob still aligning with Jeremy in the future. I actually thought we were going to get a scene where Boston Rob kind of explains exactly where they were coming from, but we didn't really get that. But then we see in the second immunity challenge that Jeremy pretty much from behind pulls out the win for his tribe in the disc throw. And so in that way, it did seem like a smarter move to keep Jeremy. If they had kept Natalie, to be honest, just based on that second immunity challenge, I believe that they would have lost once again and had to vote someone else out of their tribe. And then just to finish up with the blue tribe, we see that Natalie is not happy to go to Edge of Extinction whatsoever. She's angry at her tribe for voting her off. And I do understand that. She's a physical person, she's a loyal person, and so she just feels very betrayed and lied to. And no one wants to be the first person voted out. In San Juan del Sur, which was blood versus water season, her twin sister was actually voted off first, and then she wound up winning the game, so they were the opposite poles of the spectrum. And then in this game, she pulls a Nadia and gets voted out first. And so that obviously has to be embarrassing, and I understand why she's upset. But I do think that this was a decent move for them to make. And when I did my cast assessment, I actually said Parvati, Rob, Natalie, Jeremy, and possibly Ben were the biggest threats. So the way that the tribe broke down, old school versus new school, we did see a newer school player in Natalie get voted off, and old school kind of prevailed, at least in this episode. And so one of those 2 biggest new school threats that I had mentioned did get voted out. So I wasn't that surprised by that, but it was interesting to see it actually play out in the way in which it did. We didn't get a ton from the Blue Tribe in the second part of this episode, but one of the biggest things that we did see was Michelle talking to Ben about the fact that she was on the outs of the vote, and Ben kind of, it seemed, starting to wonder if it was smartest to align with Boston Rob. There is something to be said for meat shields, but there are plenty of those in this game. And if you look at the 9 players that remain, it actually wouldn't be that hard to go against that old school alliance. If we had Denise, Adam, Ben, Michelle, and Jeremy team up, then they would have a 5-4 advantage over Parvati, Ethan, Danielle, and Boston Rob. I might be wrong, but my prediction is that that's what we're going to see happen. Jeremy would be happy to get revenge for Natalie getting voted off, even though some of those people he would have to align with were people who did vote off Natalie, his closest ally. They definitely weren't the head of the snake. And so that's my prediction going into the second episode and their next vote off. would be that those five would align and pick off one of the old school players. But who knows? Boston Rob could completely maintain his control over Ben, over Adam, over Denise out of fear, similar to the season he won, season 22. We'll just have to wait to see how it plays out. And now let's move on to the Red Tribe, who had to vote someone out in the second half of this episode, that being Amber. We get a couple of good early conversations. Wendell calling Sandra queen and her saying, "Don't say that." And Tony knowing that he's on probation or house arrest because he can't act wild. And I got to say real quick, I'm so glad that Tony played it cool in this episode, or at least as cool as he could. As far as the biggest threats going into this season on this tribe, I saw them being Kim, Sandra, Amber, Sarah, Tony, and Tyson. I thought that Amber or Sandra would be booted first, which Amber was. But also, based on game changers, I thought that Tony might get voted out really, really quick. And who knows, he could get voted out the next episode. But in this episode, he did what he had to do to at least stick around for another round, so I was really happy to see that. It seems like he learned something from the last time that he played. But our first real inkling of exactly how the tribe dynamic will actually work within the Red Tribe was getting to see the conversation between Yul and Sophie. And I love the idea of these two aligning. After forming an alliance, Sophie does a really good job of kind of breaking the tribe into three groups, which for me makes it a lot easier to digest. And I think that's pretty accurate, and that's kind of what we see. We see Tony, Sandra, and Sarah, who all played in Game Changers together. Those three are kind of a group. I don't think that they'll necessarily stick together long term. But then we have Nick, Wendell, Sophie, and Yul, who are kind of outliers, went into this not really necessarily aligned with anyone specific. And then we have the Poker Alliance, which was heavily, heavily talked about. I found it really interesting that they showed a clip from another show. Could be wrong, but I feel like that's the first time we've ever seen that on Survivor. But I was really glad in general that Survivor was willing to address, unlike in other All-Star seasons, that pre-game alliances do exist. I mean, we obviously have a husband and a wife. Some of these people have known each other for over a decade. Some have known each other for over 15 years. And so it was nice to see that the producers were willing to address that fact, because I think it was kind of unavoidable in this season once we've gotten so far along. And then if they had tried to completely edit out the fact that the Poker Alliance was a thing and was a factor in this vote and possibly future votes, I think it would have been a big mistake. The Poker Alliance refers to the fact that Yul remembers from a game of, I don't know if it was celebrity poker or just some kind of televised poker, that Tyson, Jeremy, Kim, and Boston Rob all played together. And Tyson jokingly said if they were ever out on the island together, this would be the dream team. This would be the alliance. And they all kind of agree to that. I think that Yul really played this up. I think it is a real thing to consider, the fact that they could have made a pregame alliance and that those people have interacted more with each other than they have with some of the other cast. Whether they actually went into this game saying, "We are the Poker Alliance," I think that that's really questionable. But in that way, I think it's really smart the way that Yul played it. He convinced everyone that that was a real thing to worry about. And then by the second half of this episode, once they're looking at going to tribal council, it's a pretty sure thing that one of those three are getting voted out. And we see Sandra get that idol from Natalie in exchange for her fire token. She's played 3 other times, and fire tokens have never been a part of the game before season 40. So I think for her, especially assuming that she had a huge level of risk going into this season, I think it was just kind of a no-brainer. Because all that they've seen is this menu where the best thing on it is the fact that they could possibly get an advantage as a group in a challenge, but that costs 3 tokens. I think for her, it made a lot of sense for her to worry about her own personal safety. Because even though she came out ahead in this vote, and while it might seem obvious if they do stay as one tribe in the next 2, picking off Kim and Tyson, you never know exactly what's going to happen. But her idol is only good for the next 2 tribal councils after this episode. It was good for 3 when she got it, and then they went to tribal council later on in this episode. Once we see that Yul has solidified this alliance, Tony, Sarah, and Sandra have been let into this, have been told about the threat of a poker alliance, we get a pretty clear idea that it's going to be Kim, Amber, or Tyson that gets voted off. And while Tyson and Kim seem like bigger threats than Amber individually, the fact that they saw that Boston Rob went to tribal council once earlier in the episode and was completely safe, they realized that maybe it's up to them and that tribe to pick off one of the two, because they don't know exactly what the dynamic of the other tribe is, but they do know that Boston Rob was able to keep himself safe through that first vote. So I think this made a lot of sense. It was interesting to see how each one of them reacted to it. Amber seemed sad about it, seemed like she didn't know what to do. And then we saw Kim and Tyson both in a state of desperation. It was hard to see Tyson so on the outs. I mean, he's definitely been voted out early, like in Heroes vs. Villains, but he was in a majority alliance at that point. So to see him going to other players and just saying, please just whatever, tell me who to vote for, and saying that he needs to survive the battle in order to survive the war, I think that was his best move at that point once he realized those three were in danger. So I don't blame him and Kim for kind of jumping ship on Amber, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily really have footing with other people in the rest of the tribe. They're going to have to kind of find a way to pivot it. And the way that I see that happening is that if Kim and Tyson could somehow convince those four that are outliers in Yul, Sophie, Wendell, and Nick to pick off the game changer people, one of the game changer people, someone who's a threat like Tony, Sarah, Sandra, all three of those are really big threats. So if they were able to somehow spin it and get it to where it was 6-3 and Kim and Tyson are a block of 2, the four outliers are a block of 4, and then the game changers are a block of 3, that's the only way I can see them kind of getting their footing back with everyone. And then we see Kim just absolutely desperate, which compared to her game in One World, we have never seen Kim on the outs. We've never seen her in a state of panic. She always comes off cool, calm, and collected. And so just to see her fall on her knees and say things like, I'm approaching, I want to make it obvious, I'm walking up to your conversation. It's hard to see, but I think calling herself out on it was the way to play it, kind of like Tyson did. Like, just what do we each need to do to survive this next round of the vote? And so we do see that Amber was the only one that kind of stuck with her people and voted for Nick, but Amber does wind up getting voted off. And I think that was a really decent move. I think that the alliance that Yul and Sophie formed was really clever. The way they went about it was extremely, extremely smart and perceptive. And at the end of this episode, we see Amber bequeath her coin to Rob, obviously, and go to the edge of extinction. And we hear Natalie say that she's disappointed that it's not someone from her tribe, which I love. She's such a competitor. But I like that within the first episode, there are 2 people on edge of extinction, unlike just seeing Reem live by herself, which, while it was an interesting package, it's good that there is kind of the edge of extinction group already starting to form with 2 people already there going into the second episode. So who would I say was the best player of the episode? It's hard to say. Adam made a really strong move keeping himself safe. If he had kept his mouth shut, then he might not have been able to convince anyone to vote someone else off other than him and Denise. But I think that it would either, for me, be Yul or possibly Boston Rob. The way that Boston Rob played the Ben situation, the Danielle situation, and somehow wasn't the first one voted off, that's something in and of itself. And then Yul really masterminding that Outliers alliance against the Poker alliance and really solidifying his place in the tribe. I found that the most impressive. The worst players of this episode, I mean, Natalie and Amber obviously got voted off, but you'd have to also give it to Ben. I mean, I don't want to hate on the guy too much, but it was so awkward and painful to watch. It's just, if you didn't know this was a winter season, hadn't seen Ben's winning season, and then were told that Ben had won an entire season of Survivor, I feel like it would be really shocking based on his performance in this episode. And then I hope they don't do this, but we have the right number of people to split into 3 even tribes going into this episode. I don't think that they'll do this, and I really hope that they don't do this. I hope we get to see a little more interaction with these groups of people, how these dynamics on the 2 tribes that are established work. I do hope and think that they will, probably at 16, mix the tribes up, keep 2 tribes, but wind up mixing the groups up. And so, yeah, thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Like, comment below, let me know what your thoughts are on this episode, and then catch my next recap. I'm going to try to do these a little earlier next time, probably try to drop them on Saturday mornings around 11. So look out for that, and peace out.